Lovely. Let's make a start then. So, a little bit of a warm up, loosen up. And just let your body settle into the exercise. It's very, very common to find sort of Tai Chi sessions starting off with this. It's a very gentle exercise and one that gives you plenty of space for reflection. And so you can both play around with your posture a little bit and feel quite quickly some kind of response to that. I think with some of the slower movements, things like, are your hips loose? Is there a rhythm in the movement? Can be quite difficult. But with this one, it's not as precise in some ways, and you're just starting up, so you won't be as sort of focused. But it's a good way in, and it's how I always start my morning practice. Just sorry, I forgot to mute people. So yes, it's where I start my morning practice, and in a way, rather than thinking, right, I'm going to do this today or I'm going to do that, I do this and see where I end up. And I have routines and things that I do, but not necessarily always the same thing. So what you want to feel in your legs, really your weight ideally pressing the balls of your feet very gently into the floor, and a sort of filling up a kind of more dense feeling all the way through your legs, right into the bones as much as possible. When we start doing Tai Chi, I think the first place that we tend to feel it is in the muscles of the legs here. As they get stronger, they're also able to soften a little bit under that load. And so gradually it feels as though the sort of feeling of the effort penetrates the body, soaks into the body, even as far as the bones, but not straining and not a static thing. Ideally, you will feel that there's a bit of sort of life there. Remember, even your bones are alive. They're living tissue, so we tend to think of them as these inert things, but they're not. There's a constant process going on there. And then same thing around hips, lower back, buttocks, same process really of certain muscles like the glute muscles and big muscles of the back beginning to get to a point where they can maintain this posture without the feeling that they're really kind of stiffening up. And at that point, the effort, the load seeps in. So gradually, more and more of the body is engaged in the whole process. And I think we talk about muscles relaxing. It's really the wrong way of describing it. A muscle that's relaxed is one that's not working, of course. But terms like softening are often used in Tai Chi to sort of point us at this kind of quality that we're looking for. And we build on that with images like moving through water. We program the body to move differently. So eventually in your arms, you will feel the same thing. And there's a certain crossover with more physically based, shall we call it, more kind of commonly based conditioning exercises. But there's also differences in particular how we use the mind, I think. And then just raising your arms. Some people do say that you shouldn't mix different sort of techniques. I'm not one of those. I do see the value in things like resistance training, weight training, that kind of thing. But it is important to realise that that's only a part of the condition of the body that we look for doing Tai Chi. Okay, so then just easing forwards and backwards. So all of this conditioning is really to be said to be in the service of movement, allowing space, allowing the capacity for movement. So we don't want any of the parts of the body that are working to be overworked. We don't want muscles to become so big that we get that kind of muscle-bound stiffness, for instance. So this is also a good exercise because, again, it starts off, we feel this rocking in our feet, and that's where our attention is. But as we get more used to that, we realize that even as deep as the skeleton, once again, there's a movement that we can feel. Imagine that your skeleton, or maybe a part of it, maybe focus on your spine to start off with, like a plant in water. A plant that's in water is supported by the water, by the density of the water, but it's not locked in like a pipe in concrete. So your spine, and indeed, as I say, your whole skeleton can just gently sort of float forwards and backwards. And a plant in water will be moved by the slightest ripple running across the water. So again, there isn't a strong resistance to the movement. And then your arms out to your sides, following the movement. And think about some of the things we've been looking at in the past few weeks. We've been talking about, for instance, this opening and closing in chest and upper back. And again, in a nice simple exercise like this, you can just take time out to observe these things, to bring them into a clearer focus. So then we can begin to think about another really interesting element in Tai Chi, which is the effect of this focusing of your attention, this focusing of your awareness. It seems to work to really enhance, to build these elements. I think it's a little bit like, probably an example I've used many times for some of you, being in a crowded room, everybody talking, and if you just stand and focus your attention on one particular conversation, it sort of highlights it, it brings it out a little bit more. Gradually, over a period of time, we focus on different elements, we highlight different elements, and they blend gradually. And then sinking down and pushing up. So for instance, I've recently been doing an interesting exercise that's involved a certain amount of sort of contraction in one side and then the other, or alternating. And I realized this morning, going through different exercises entirely, that I was very much aware that that was still going on. And I was aware of the significance of that particular very subtle change in the body, and not just for that initial exercise. So rooting down, trying to allow the focus of your attention to settle on that feeling of your weight dropping through the ground. And then trying to keep that focus and just building on it so that you feel, you can notice the expansion of your body out from the root. So your legs straightening a little, feeling the sort of movement up through your back and so on, and then back down. And then the effect that that has on your arms. That full, that dense feeling that I described in your legs, hopefully beginning to spread through the whole of your body. So that's where an image like moving in water can be so useful. And then change to the wild goose. When I describe that feeling, sort of your spine moving in your body, or maybe you noticed it in your legs, can you also notice it in your fingers, palms of your hands? And now, parting the clouds. Do this one more time. And then joining those three movements up, so we have the little sequence emphasizing in the first one belly and lower back, an expansion and contraction there, and then belly and up into the solar plexus and the middle part of your back, contracting and then expanding belly, solar plexus, then higher up, upper part of the chest and your arms. Back to the beginning. One more facing forwards. And then we're going to just revise this turning that we sometimes do with this exercise. So remember, you're going to turn progressively in each sort of segment, if you like to think of it like that. So for the first one, you turn in the hips and the waist, and your upper body just follows that right up into your shoulders. And as you start the wild goose, you do the same thing again, but in the middle here, in the middle dantian, you turn just a little bit further. And once again, a little bit further as as you go into parting the clouds. It's a little bit arbitrary, those regions that I've picked. You could sort of feel it in all sorts of ways. Going the other side, you could take it to a very fine level indeed, or each vertebra or something like that. But really, it's just so that you begin to understand how we get these expansive turns without straining in your body, to get used to moving, to initiating, shall we say, all movement from your legs, your feet, and in the center of your body. Building on that right into your fingertips without causing a strain, a stiffening. Remember, if you start to stiffen up in a particular muscle, it will block the penetration of that movement deeper into the body. So, for instance, when you push your arms up, if you're straining in your triceps and your biceps, that's the part of the body that will get worked by that. Again, that can be a useful thing to do, but it's not what we're trying to do here. Do one more round of this on each side. When one part of your body is in motion, your whole body is in motion. Your whole body is part of that motion, engaged in that motion. And change to dragon plucks the stars from the sky. One time on each side. And then changing, pushing in four directions. It's not only when we turn that we feel that build up progressively through our body, or indeed the reverse, the sort of draining away. Whether we're turning or not, it's there. So here, for instance, it's almost like you feel the pressure in the feet and the legs coming up to your belly and into your chest, and then draining back down. One more round. Just remind yourself, weight a little bit forwards in your feet, soften your knees, hips dropping back. So again, we can feel with the next one, circling palms, expanding here, and then here, and then here. Your arms being pushed out. It's comfortable at the turn. Be very careful with your back and your spine on this one. It's a strong turn. And it should feel strong, but again, not stiff and not tight. Let's switch sides. And again, if it's comfortable, the turn. And rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. You'll come into the upright position and just give your legs a shake. So this idea of total movement, the holistic movement, in other words, the whole body, one way or another, engaged, should lead us into an awareness of the movement itself, the continuity in the movement, momentum, flow, energy, however you care to think about it. They're all just labels. But it does bring us closer to this idea of a movement within the body that is related to both body and mind, to both the physical body and our awareness. And that's really the notion of the chi when we use that term in things like Tai Chi is is really based on that sort of idea. And we want a sense of harmony, a harmony in the flow, a harmony between that flow and body and mind, and so on and so forth. Now, side to side. So recognizing that has a very practical element. If, for instance, you're doing this and, I don't know, maybe you're a bit tight in the hip, it's just an example. So maybe it's just one hip. So you can look at what you're doing, and especially if it's not both sides. Well, what am I doing that's different? Are you straining in this hip? Or even if you're not, can you find that part of the body that's going to feed into your hip? So if, say, it is a hip that feels a bit stiff, focus on your foot. Rather than thinking about the hip, push the foot down, feel the push back. That may work, that may not, but or it may be that you can use an awareness of that part of the body. You can use an image. You want a sense of something flowing through your hip rather than getting stuck to the hip. Don't spend too long on any of these ideas. If after a while that hasn't worked, don't keep obsessing about it, because then you sort of tighten up around it. Just be careful with, obviously, with any part of the body that does feel stiff, and just perhaps move your attention on. And then transfer your weight across and turning. Hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. One more on each side. Cow gazes at the moon. And then straighten your feet up and part in the wild horse's mane. So for this one, your heels stay on the floor, the arms don't move as far. But consequently, we're perhaps a little bit more aware of the internal movements. It's the same kind of process, really, as I described, as you essentially use the big muscles of your body, like the biceps, triceps, the quadriceps, less, or at least not 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 overusing them. There's more of a sense of balance, more of a sense of harmony between them and other parts of the body. So the movement, the effect of the movement penetrates that little bit further. And in the same way, when we're doing a movement like this with a quieter movement in our arms, our awareness has more space to notice what else is going on within our body. Obviously, that's a thing that is helped by an experience with the movements, a sense of, you're okay with the basic sequence. It's quite tricky with this particular movement. Yeah, one more on each side. And just bring your hands around to either side of the ball, circle around. So, for instance, with this one, initially, basically what we're doing is moving our arms. You may find that your shoulders start to ache, and that's uncomfortable. So eventually, we learn to let go of that straining in our shoulders. We feel the movement deeper down into our body. And eventually we notice that there's quite a response in our lower back. So there's two things now. If we want to move our arms, lower back and hips and that kind of area are obviously important. But also, this is quite a good exercise to just release that feeling of blockage that we sometimes get in the lower part of the back. And then go back the other way. And then just turn it. And this time, slowly to a halt. And shake out. So interestingly, I mean, to illustrate what I was saying about noticing things, that thing about circling the ball and its relationship to the lower back, I wasn't really aware of until I had to go an exercise called deer play. It's actually a companion exercise to bear play that we do sometimes. Now, deer play, you take a different stance, you hold your hands here, and then what you do is you move your hands in a small circle, like it's supposed to be like the deer wagging its tail. And when I did this, I noticed a huge amount of movement in my lower back. And after that, when I did this, I thought, well, it's almost the same exercise in that sense. So I actually noticed more when I was moving my arms less, noticing that it impacted on other exercises. So these different elements surface after a while, but we do need at times to focus our attention on one or the other of them. It's good to know when you notice something to work with that, so that those connections become hardwired into your system. What I was saying about how we approach working with areas that are blocked or tight in one way or another, we have to be very careful with that. Obviously, if something is blocked or tight, there can be a reason for that, and Tai Chi and Qigong can really help with that, really help release that. If it doesn't, then that's maybe the time to go and talk to your GP or something like that. Of course, this is not some kind of miracle cure, but sometimes the approach I described, you could think about, well, can I think about my posture, or what I'm doing with my foot, or something like that, or you could use an image. There's sometimes a divide made in these systems between what are called fire methods and water methods, or sometimes they're labeled confusingly as Buddhist or Taoist, but I tend to think of them as fire or water. Fire is much more incisive. It's that, oh, right, my hip is here, I need to do this with my knee, I need to do this with my ankle, a kind of process of analysis. Whereas water is much more flowing, water flowing over a rock in a riverbed, gradually wearing it away is the image I often have for water. Sometimes you'll find some systems, they'll describe different exercises. This is the fire sequence, this is the water sequence. And that's a useful way of approaching these things if it suits you to do that. Again, you focus on one particular thing. I tend to think of them as attitudes, approaches to movement. So it could be that you do the same movement with that sense of incisiveness that we would associate with fire, or maybe focus on the flow and move between them. Don't get stuck in one or the other. Too much fire, too much water is an imbalance. So again, we want to try and find a balance between that. These ideas, the harmony, balance, not too far one way or the other, run through the whole system. Now, 1 foot forwards. Transferring your weight. So these kind of, I suppose, I'm going to call them divisions, these different approaches are complementary. And we can see them working in an exercise like this. So think about the movement of your weight into your back foot. Quite often that's the one where we feel less stable. Moving backwards is more difficult, where we're kind of designed in a way, we've evolved to move forwards. Going backwards is always a little bit trickier. You can't see where you're going, for one thing. But there's other things as well. When I move my weight back, what I want to do is, as always, to focus my weight behind the ball of my foot. Now going forwards, that's a very straightforward, if you'll pardon the pun, process. I go forward, the ball of my foot stops me going further forwards. But when I go back, the first part of my foot that I feel the weight in is the heel. And if I go back any more from there, I fall over. So there's different ways that we can approach this. We can think, well, okay, what is it that actually moves the weight forwards? And a key part of the body is going to be the pelvis. So as we go forward, we release here, we allow the pelvis to tuck under. That's quite strong in the leg. And that may work, but we may find that a bit frustrating. We may want to move the pelvis, may move it too far. We don't get it exactly right all the time. And it gets worse and worse at that point. So I can't do this. You get kind of angry with yourself with doing it. There's no point in that. Another way of doing it is to think, right, I want the weight to go just behind the ball of my foot. Imagine the weight just dropping into that foot. So let your intent guide your body down. Both ways can be effective. There may be other ways as well, other things that you can analyze, other images you can use. But that's just an example of where we can use these different approaches, different perspectives on these things. Either way, take great care when you go back, and especially now, going to start raising toes and heel. So, of course, we want to avoid leaning backwards. And sometimes we're told sort of like lean forwards when you do a particular exercise. And this is perhaps not a bad exercise to do that with, because we tend to lean back. If you think to yourself, well, I'm going to lean forwards, you'll probably be upright. Again, you don't want to go too far with that. So, but these are corrective things. And then stepping in. Try not to do something like this. So the actual step is the leg contracting. Contraction between hip and foot. Shake out. So this is a thing where it might be useful to you to say, for instance, grab a chair and think, what's he on about? So just have the chair there. Hold on to the chair and think, oh, right. Expanding, contracting, expanding, contracting, and then expanding, pushing the heel down, contracting, expanding, contracting. If you're trying to stand on one leg while you're thinking about that, that becomes quite difficult. But if you practice it like that, then eventually it'll become much more natural to you. So have your other foot forwards, transferring your weight. So as we progress in Tai Chi and Qigong, we start to identify certain things that we want to work on. And that's quite a useful process. We certainly want the whole body to move and so on and so forth. But I generally have one or two things that I'm trying to develop, and maybe just focusing on those in a particular exercise, or maybe doing an exercise to help me build that, or whatever. And I find that I used to worry, how am I going to integrate this into the whole? And then realizing 6 months later that it's become integrated in its own time. And then raising your toes and your heel. Stepping in. Good, and shake out. This process of development is a slow one. You have to be fairly patient. And I think after a while, after you've noticed that things are progressing a little bit, that's easier because you're less frustrated. It doesn't happen overnight. And again, we're thrown back to, oh, still haven't got that, and so on and so forth. But you do notice over months and years that there's a change. And it reminds me a little bit like cooking a meal. When we cook something, we prepare the ingredients and then we prepare them in certain ways and follow a process through. And then there's always a point where you're kind of just reliant on the actual cooking, the food on the heat or something like that, and you leave it or you stir it or something, but you don't cook it. What happens is it gets cooked by the heat. You prepare the ingredients, and then the process of cooking is one of those ingredients and the flavors and so on, the textures blending with each other, quite kind of, I suppose, organically in a sense. And a good cook will tell you, as they've told me, that the key to cooking a good meal is preparation. Prepare the ingredients first. Look at any recipe, they give you the list and say, this is what you do, and you do it in order, and you get the meal at the end. So it's like a kind of following a recipe in a way. Now, have your first foot forwards. Pigeon spreads its wings. Fisherman cast the net. And pushing a wave. One more time. And then with your front hand, just take it down to about level with your hips. Sink back and turn. Go forward. So you're pushing with the shoulder, and as you arrive in the front foot, turn. Sink your weight back. Right. If I show you this from the side, I'm going to exaggerate something. It's like I go back here, you see how my hand isn't actually moving, and then it gets pulled in. And then I go forwards, and it gets pushed out. If you've ever been by the river or canal and sort of pulled a boat into the side or pushed a boat out from the side, it's similar to that. Again, I've exaggerated. It's like you pull in, and then there's a bit of resistance, and then the boat comes in. Likewise, going forwards. And it shouldn't be that obvious from the outside, but you want to get that sort of feeling within the body. And then same thing with the back hand. And then both hands together, stir in the beans. Good. And shake out. Other foot forwards. Pigeon spreads its wings. Fisherman cast the net. And pushing away. And then with the front hand, and then the rear. You turn towards the front foot when you go forwards, towards the back foot when you go back. It's really all you need to know about the actual shape that your hands are making. And if you keep that as the central part of your focus, if you've hardwired that awareness, then when we bring the other hand in to the movement, it's a lot less confusing. when you find yourself going, oh, what am I doing now? Bring your attention back to your center, to your feet, to the movement of your weight. Good. Shake it. Open your hands together. Face. Your head and neck. Shoulder. And your arm. The side. Your back. Your hips. Belly. And the upper part of your chest. Good. So whatever you've absorbed during this class, just allow that to settle. Everything else will be repeated at some point or another in any case. So bringing your attention back as we started really with that awareness of your weight in your feet, softness of your knees, your hips hanging back, that full, dense feeling in your legs, as deep into the legs as you can really get a sense for. And then embrace tiger, return to mountain. One more time. And stand. Shake out. Brilliant. Thank you, everybody. Hope that was good. Hope you managed to get something from it.
Thank you.
Look after yourself.